Richard Debate was charged with murder first, tampering with evidence, and providing a false statement to troopers.
Grant says Debate is being held under a $1 million bond and is scheduled to appear in court on Monday. State police say the investigation turned over every stone.
It's very important to follow all leads, follow all evidence, speak to all witnesses, any potential suspects. This is about the victim.
Grant says the lengthy investigation was a collaborative effort from several factions of law enforcement. She claims it was necessary to be extremely thorough during the process in order to prevent possible mistrials in the future.
There was a house on Birchview Drive that glowed with warmth, laughter, and the kind of joy only real families understand. It was the kind of place where neighbors smiled as they passed, children played freely on the lawn, and on holidays, the air smelled of cinnamon, vanilla, and the kind of magic that only a mother like Connie Debate could create. Connie was the beating heart of that house, 39 years old, brimming with life, always organizing, always giving. Holidays weren't just events on the calendar for her. They were spectacles. Christmas meant hand-strung lights, homemade cookies, carefully wrapped gifts for every child who crossed the threshold. Halloween came with fog machines, haunted rooms, and laughter echoing long into the night. Even Easter became an enchanted fable. Connie once told a group of wide-eyed children that if they tossed jelly beans into the yard and went to sleep, they'd wake to find them transformed into lollipops. That night, after everyone else was asleep, she crept through the garden in the cold dark, raking up jelly beans and scattering candy, because that's who she was, magic in a mother's skin. Originally from Rockville, Connecticut, Connie had grown up in a big, boisterous family. That kind of upbringing left an imprint, one where love meant action, affection it meant showing up, and togetherness meant everything. So even after high school, when most people drift apart, Connie refused to let the distance grow. She held reunions. She hosted dinners. She made sure people came back together, even if only for a few hours. If she could help it, no one she cared about would ever feel forgotten. Her friends adored her. They said she was the first person to show up when something went wrong, no matter the hour, no matter how busy she was. She had a way of making you feel like you mattered, like your struggles were her own. Always smiling, always hopeful, always giving more than she received. And then, there was Richard. Some said they were an unlikely pair. He was quiet where she was loud, stiff where she was open. A computer technician by trade, Richard had a reputation for being, well, a little bland. But the more people got to know him, the more they saw the silly side that Connie seemed to bring out. He was goofy, at times charming in a boyish way. He made people laugh, and Connie laughed loudest of all. They met at a summer party, and from the outside, they seemed to balance each other perfectly. He grounded her, and she lifted him. When Richard brought Connie to meet his parents, his mother later said she knew instantly. Connie was the one. They married on the 4th of July in 2003 in a small but joy-filled ceremony and moved into their now fateful home on Birchview Drive. Their two sons, Richard Jr., called RRJ, and little Connor, became the center of Connie's universe. If she had once thrown parties for the adults, now she threw them for her boys. She'd spend weeks planning their birthdays, crafting intricate games, designing homemade piñatas, and turning each celebration into a memory etched in childhood forever. To her, it wasn't about showing off. It was about giving her children the kind of magical childhood she remembered, and more. But even in the most perfect-looking homes, shadows find places to settle. Richard worked a lot. That's what Connie told people. He's just busy, this way, she'd say with a half smile. Tech stuff, you know. But there were moments when that smile seemed a little too forced, when her eyes lingered a little too long on something unsaid. She didn't complain. Connie wasn't the type. She covered for people, especially those she loved. But that habit, born of loyalty, would soon become her undoing. From the outside, nothing seemed amiss. They had a lovely home, two healthy boys, A yard decorated with plastic pumpkins in October and a blow-up snowman in December. But behind the walls, things were beginning to fracture. Slowly. Quietly. As they often do. It's easy, in hindsight, to look back and wonder what signs were missed, and the long absences, and the faint flicker of disconnection in Richard's eyes, the way Connie had started to hesitate before speaking about him. But real life doesn't offer the luxury of narration. There are no red warning lights, no dramatic music, only the subtle, barely perceptible shifts that don't register until it's far too late. December 2015 arrived cold and glittering. Connie, as always, went all out. Lights framed every window, a tree gleamed in the living room, and the boys whispered to each other about what Santa might bring. The house smelled like cinnamon and pine. She'd wrapped every gift, planned every dish, organized every stocking. This was the time of year she lived for, when everything felt whole, joyful, full of love. 2 days before Christmas, on the morning of December 23rd, Connie got the boys ready for school, kissed them goodbye, and watched as Richard drove them off. She had a spin class scheduled for later that morning. Nothing unusual, just another cold, ordinary winter day. But what she didn't know, what none of us ever do when tragedy is just hours away, is that her story had already begun to end. Somewhere in that warm, peaceful home, something dark was stirring, and before the sun would set, Birchview Drive would never be the same again. It was just after 1100 a.m., when the stillness of Birchview. Sirens pierced the quiet winter air. Patrol cars screeched around the corner. Neighbors stepped out onto their porches, clutching coats around themselves, confusion written across their faces. The flashing blue and red lights reflected off Christmas decorations as officers surged toward house number 7. Within minutes, rumors began to stir. A break-in, they said. A violent one. Someone was hurt. No. 2 people. The Debate house. It was the Debate house? Officers moved swiftly, locking down the entire block. Door to door, they warned residents to stay inside, to gather in a room and wait. Some parents clutched their children close. Others pressed their ears to the floor, waiting for the sounds of chaos to fade. Inside the Debate home, police found a scene that could have come straight out of a nightmare. Connie was lying in the basement, blood pooling beneath her body. She had been shot, once in the head, once in the stomach. Her lifeless body rested near the foot of the stairs. There was no sign of a struggle, no shattered glass, no overturned furniture, just stillness, just death. Upstairs, Richard lay on the kitchen floor, partially tied to a chair, his face streaked with ash and sweat, a faint trace of blood on his legs. The chair lay on top of him, tipped over as if in struggle. The air still smelled faintly of smoke. He was alive, but barely. Or at least, that's what it looked like. Paramedics loaded him into an ambulance as detectives tried to piece together what had happened. The story, when it came, was one no one could have anticipated. According to Richard, the morning had started out like any other. He left the house around 8 a.m. to drop off their sons at school. Then, realizing he had forgotten his laptop, he returned about 30 minutes later to quickly grab it before heading back out. Connie, he said, had just left for her spin class at the YMCA. But when he got back, something felt off. He said he noticed the back door slightly ajar and heard noises upstairs. Quiet at first, then louder, curious and uneasy. He crept up the stairs. That's when he saw him. A man, tall and broad, over 6 feet, wearing camouflage clothes and a ski mask, was rummaging through their bedroom drawers. He held a knife. When he saw Richard, he pointed the blade at him and demanded money. Credit cards, PIN numbers. "I gave him everything," Richard later said from his hospital bed. "Wallet, cards, anything he asked for." And then, he said, Connie came back. According to Richard, he screamed for her to run, to get out of the house, but she didn't. Instead, she ran down into the basement. Richard said she went to get a gun they kept locked in a box there. They had 2 guns in the house, one in the basement, and another in their bedroom closet. She must have gone to protect them. He said, "The intruder chased her." 2 gunshots rang out. When Richard rushed down moments later, he said he found Connie on the floor, motionless. The intruder was still there, holding one of Richard's own guns. The man then turned on Richard, stabbing him in the legs with a box cutter, zip-tying him to a chair, and, according to Richard, burning him with a blowtorch. "I was screaming," Richard said. "I couldn't move. I was dizzy. I thought I was going to die." But in the midst of the chaos, he claimed he managed to knock over the torch and burn the attacker's face, forcing him to flee, somehow still tied to the chair. Richard said he dragged himself to the kitchen, hit the panic button on the alarm system, and called 911. It was a story straight out of a thriller: home invasion, struggle, heroic resistance, a masked man vanishing into thin air. At first, the police had no reason to doubt him. There was, after all, a dead woman, a half-bound man with wounds, and a house that had witnessed horror. But even in the first retelling, something wasn't right. Richard's injuries seemed convenient, shallow, superficial. The burn didn't match what a real blowtorch would likely inflict. And the zip ties, only one arm and one leg were tied, and his neck had a plastic tie that was, oddly, loose enough for him to move. And then there was the tone. Paramedics noted that Richard wasn't acting like a man who had just lost his wife. He was shaken, yes, but calm, almost rehearsed. He answered questions directly, offered information quickly, too quickly. Detectives noted the ease with which he told the story. Even when the details were gruesome, there was something detached in his words, as though he was describing a scene from a film, not his real life. And then came the neighbors' stories. A few said they saw nothing strange that morning, not a single car out of place, not one suspicious figure. One of Connie's closest friends, after hearing about the break-in, whispered, "That doesn't sound like her. If she thought someone was in the house, she'd have run for help, not toward a gun." It was only the first day of the investigation, and yet the cracks were already beginning to show. In the days that followed, the town of Ellington moved like it was holding its breath. The yellow crime scene tape fluttered in the wind like ghosts of the life that once was. Connie's house sat quiet, heavy with absence. The once glowing home on Birchview Drive had become something else entirely: a crime scene, a rumor mill, a haunting reminder of how fragile everything really is. Friends and neighbors gathered around Connie's family, trying to make sense of it all. No one could believe she was gone. A woman that full of life, of joy, snatched away just 2 days before Christmas. The community mourned. Children lit candles. Her friends sobbed in silence. But even in the midst of grief, whispers began to rise. And they all seemed to point in one direction: Richard. At Connie's funeral, hundreds came to pay their respects. In the bitter cold, they stood in line for hours. Teachers, neighbors, childhood friends, Connie's best friends, women who had known her for over 20 years, finally approached Richard after waiting their turn in the receiving line. But what happened next chilled them far more than the winter air. Richard looked at them blankly and asked, "How do you know my wife?" They froze. These were women who had spent holidays with them, whose kids had played with Romjay and Connor, women who had eaten at their table more times than they could count. And now, he didn't recognize them. They exchanged glances, said nothing, and moved along. Maybe it was grief, they reasoned. Maybe he was just in shock. But later, in private, one of them whispered, he didn't have a single mark on him. No bruises, no burns, nothing. Richard left the funeral early, before most, before family, before friends. That didn't sit right with anyone. And still, no arrest, no suspect, no new leads, only silence. and Richard's silence was beginning to feel like something more than pain. You'd think that a man who survived a brutal attack, who lost his wife in such a violent way, would be broken, withdrawn, drowning in grief. But Richard, didn't seem broken at all. A week after Connie's death, he was out, having drinks, laughing with friends, hosting gatherings in the very house where his wife had been murdered. Facebook posts with vague statements like "staying strong for the boys" appeared, along with photos where the smiles didn't quite reach his eyes. And here's the thing about grief. It's unpredictable. People process loss differently, but there's a difference between mourning and moving on like nothing ever happened. To those who knew Connie, Richard's behavior didn't just feel off. It felt cold, calculated, like a man playing the role of a grieving husband rather than living it. As police continued to investigate, small inconsistencies began to surface. Richard's account of the timeline, what time Connie left, when he came home, when the break-in happened, was vague and shifting. One version said he heard Connie being shot. Another said he saw it. And then, strangely, another said he heard nothing at all. He told first responders that the intruder was still in the house. Later, he said the man had fled. The 911 call, it wasn't made until nearly 10:30 a.m., but Richard claimed Connie had been shot at 9:05. That's not just a miscalculation. That's over an hour of missing time. And then came the questions no one could ignore. Why wasn't anything stolen? Nothing was missing. Not the jewelry, not electronics, not even the wallet Richard claimed the attacker took. It was found outside, untouched. Why was there no forced entry, no shattered glass, no pried doors, just a slightly open basement window? Why did the dogs, trained canine units, fail to pick up any scent of an intruder leaving the home? In fact, the first dog on the scene repeatedly tried to go to Richard in the ambulance. Why did his injuries seem so minor? Nurses reported shallow cuts, the kind that stung but didn't bleed deeply, the kind that looked staged. It was around this time, when investigators were chasing shadows, that something unexpected happened. On Christmas Eve, just one day after Connie's death, Richard hired a defense attorney. A week later, he filed a claim on Connie's $475,000 life insurance policy. He also withdrew $93,000 from an investment account in her name. The grief that should have paralyzed him somehow didn't slow him at all. And still, Connie couldn't speak for herself. But she had left something behind. On her iPhone, dated back to December 2014, exactly 1 year before her death, was a note titled, "Why I Want a Divorce." It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't hateful. It was simply honest. She wrote about Richard's irresponsibility with money, his detachment, his refusal to communicate. He takes money from accounts that don't belong to him, says he's sorry but takes no responsibility. I don't know anything about his day. I'm tired of pretending things are fine when they're not. She wrote about how people liked him when he was in a good mood, how he could be fun, attractive even, but that she was tired of covering for him. Tired of lying. And just like that, the illusion cracked. This wasn't a man clinging to the love of his life. This was a man who had been living a double life. And slowly, painfully, those lives were beginning to collide. In every tragedy, there comes a moment when the fog begins to lift, when grief gives way to clarity, and when people stop asking, "How could this happen?" and begin asking, "Who made it happen?" For detectives working the Dabate case, that moment came quietly, hidden inside a hospital room, only hours after Connie's body had been taken from the basement. Richard had just finished giving his version of events: a masked man, a home invasion, a struggle, a fire. But then, unprompted, he brought up something else, something odd. He told them about Sarah. He didn't have to. No one had asked, but it slipped out, like a confession pretending to be casual. "I've been seeing someone," he said. "Sarah. She's a friend from high school." Connie knew. It wasn't a secret. Except it was. Sarah wasn't just a passing affair. She was 8 months pregnant with Richard's child. Let's pause here, because this is where the story changes. This is no longer just a tale of a tragic murder. This is about betrayal, about double lives, about the kind of deception that doesn't just bend trust, it destroys it. Richard and Sarah had reconnected in May 2015. At first, it was subtle, texting, occasional coffee, but within weeks, it became more. They slept together, more than once, and soon, Sarah was pregnant. What did Richard tell her? He told her he loved her, that he was going to leave Connie, that he was ready to start a new life. What did he tell Connie? Nothing. Sarah knew Connie. She had even stood at their wedding, reading scripture at the altar, and now she was carrying Connie's husband's child. When detectives pushed for details, Richard's story shifted like sand. First, he said Connie had agreed to help Sarah have a child, and that the pregnancy was planned, Connie's idea, even. "We were going to donate sperm, too, the conventional way," he said. It was untraditional, but we were all okay with it. It was a lie, and a bad one. Second, he changed his tune. This time, Connie couldn't have another baby, and Sarah had offered to carry one for them. They'd co-parent, all three of them, a modern family. But that didn't fit either. Because just days before the murder, Richard sent a text to Sarah that said, "I love you. I'm going to leave Connie. Tomorrow." And Sarah, bless her, believed him. She had no idea she was standing on the edge of a plan that had nothing to do with love and everything to do with elimination. And what about Connie? Did she know? No one can say for sure, but those closest to her didn't think so. They believed she would have told someone, her mother, her sister, her best friend. Connie didn't keep secrets when it came to betrayal. She didn't stay silent. What she did know, however, was that something had changed, that Richard had grown cold, evasive, secretive, that money was missing, that the lies were piling up. On December 22nd, just one day before she died, Connie texted Richard in frustration. "You lied to me. I am again cleaning up your mess. Great day off. And Merry Christmas." He replied, "It will be a very Merry Christmas." That reply doesn't feel like irony anymore. It feels like forewarning. Behind the scenes, Richard had been preparing his escape. He'd opened a secret credit card, used it to pay for Sarah's hotel stays, flowers, gifts, and, on one occasion, over $1,000 at a strip club. He made internet searches for things no innocent man should ever be curious about. Deadly over-the-counter drug combinations. Fast, untraceable poisons. Tasteless poison easily available. He was looking for a way out, clean, quiet, undetectable. And when he couldn't find one, he created a scene so elaborate, so theatrical, it nearly worked. What's most chilling isn't just that Richard wanted a new life, it's that he calculated the cost of that life. He knew divorce would ruin his image, that he'd lose friends, that he'd face financial consequences. He didn't want to split custody. He didn't want to share his house. He didn't want to start over honestly. He didn't want to lose, so instead he erased Connie. Not out of rage, not out of fear, but out of convenience. You see, some killers don't snap. They plan. They smile through Christmas lights. They make hot chocolate for the kids. They tuck you in at night while they're already deciding how to get rid of you. And that's what makes them so dangerous. Because they don't look like monsters. They look like husbands. Connie couldn't speak for herself, but her Fitbit did. It began slowly, one timeline that didn't quite add up, one login that shouldn't have happened, one alert that contradicted Richard's words. And then it snowballed until every lie he told collapsed under the weight of truth. Let's walk through it step by step, because once you see it, you can't unsee it. Richard claimed that he left the house at 8 o'clock a.m., dropped off the kids at school, then headed to work. He said he realized he forgot his laptop, turned around, and came home around 8:45. That's when, he said, he encountered the intruder, Connie. He insisted, had returned unexpectedly from her canceled spin class, walked in during the attack, and was tragically killed at 9:05 a.m. Sounds clean. Sounds believable. Except he never left the house. 8:26 a.m. 8:27 a.m. Richard is actively browsing Facebook from his home computer. That's the exact time he said he was on the road. 8:41 a.m. His computer logs into Outlook.com, again from the same IP. Still at home. 8:46 a.m. Connie's Fitbit and YMCA check-in confirm she has just left the house, heading to her spin class. So not only was Richard not driving, Connie wasn't even home when he said she was killed. 8:50 a.m. Richard disarms the home alarm using his phone. He rearms it 9 minutes later. Then, 8:53 a.m. Connie checks in at the YMCA and begins her workout. She's alive. She's safe. She's moving. 9:04 a.m. Richard sends an email to his boss, claiming he's going to be late for work. He says he wrote it while pulled over in the car. Except, metadata shows it was sent from his home network. 9:08 a.m. Connie leaves the YMCA and heads home. At this point, everything is still intact. No break-in, no attacker, just one man, waiting. And this is where it gets chilling. 9:23 a.m. Garage door opens. Connie arrives home. 9:40 to 9:46 a.m. She's still on Facebook, posting, scrolling, chatting, alive. At 9:55, Richard is browsing the YMCA website, the same place Connie had just left. Detectives believe he was trying to verify whether anyone had seen her, whether she checked in, whether someone might ask questions later. And then, the final moments. 10:05 a.m. Connie's Fitbit detects her final movements. Heart rate stops. Steps end. Silence. 10:12 a.m. Richard hits the panic button. He waits a full hour and 7 minutes after she returns home before calling for help. Why? Because he needed time to stage the scene. Time to tie himself loosely to a chair. Time to create wounds shallow enough to bleed, but not enough to scar. Time to torch his own sock and scream just loud enough for no one to hear. This wasn't a man in shock. This was a man in control. Everything about Richard's story, the heroic struggle, the masked man, the zip ties, the Vin Diesel voice, was an elaborate fantasy. But fantasy doesn't leave footprints. Data does. And Connie's body told the truth. She hadn't been caught in the crossfire. She wasn't a victim of random violence. She had walked into her own home, greeted by the man she trusted most, and he had already decided she wasn't leaving alive. Here's the thing about modern murderers. They know how to lie, but they forget something. Technology never lies back. The Fitbit didn't flinch. The email didn't stutter. The garage door didn't open itself. And the alarm system, cold, mechanical, exact, recorded every moment he tried to erase. In April 2017, over a year after Connie's death, Richard was finally arrested. The man who had smiled at her funeral, claimed her life insurance, and raised her sons in the same house where she died, was charged with murder, tampering with evidence, making false statements. He posted a $1 million bond and walked free while awaiting trial, raising the child he had with Sarah free, while Connie's family grieved in silence. Justice moves slowly, but when it arrives, it comes with weight. And in the next chapter, it arrives in full force. It took more than 6 years for the courtroom doors to open. 6 Christmases without Connie, 6 birthdays her children spent without her laughter, 6 long years of silence, waiting for a voice that could no longer speak. And when the trial of Richard Debate finally began in April 2022, the world watched. No cameras were allowed inside, but the testimony painted pictures more vivid than any lens could capture. There were 600 pieces of evidence, over 130 witnesses, a full 5 weeks of testimony. The prosecution built their case like a clockmaker, precision in every gear. The Fitbit data, the alarm logs, the emails, Facebook activity, garage door sensors, the life insurance claim made just days after Connie's death, the affair, the secret credit card, the search history for poisons and painless ways to kill, each fact by itself concerning, together, undeniable. Richard took the stand. He told the jury he had loved both women, that he was trapped. He admitted to the affair, to the lies, but not the murder. He said he missed Connie every day. But the courtroom didn't buy it. His voice shook, but his eyes stayed dry. He spoke of guilt, but not sorrow. He painted himself as a victim, but his story was hollow, frayed at the edges. Even Sarah, the woman he had tried to build a new life with, took the stand, tearfully. She told the court she never pressured him, that she never wanted to break a family apart. She would have raised the baby alone. She didn't want this. She never asked for this. Richard never told her about the plan, because there never was one, not with her. Only with himself. When Connie's sister testified, the courtroom held its breath. She spoke of the last time she saw her, of Connie's love for her boys, of the family trip they were supposed to take the week after she was killed. "He walked into our parents' house the next day," she said, "and the first thing he said was, 'I didn't do it. There was someone in the house. I need a lawyer.'" No grief, no trembling, just preloaded excuses. The defense tried everything. They pointed to a house cleaner who claimed to see a shadow near the window once. They focused on a single, unknown DNA sample on the gun. They said the police had tunnel vision, that they only ever looked at Richard. But here's the truth. The police did look elsewhere. They investigated the contractor. They followed every lead. They ruled everyone out. Until only one man was left standing, the man whose story crumbled with every login, every click, every breath Connie took after she was supposed to be dead. In May 2022, after just 3 hours of deliberation, the jury returned. Guilty on all counts. The courtroom erupted, some in gasps, some in tears, some in quiet, painful relief. Richard stood still, as if the moment hadn't reached him yet, but everyone else knew. Justice had finally come. In August 22, Richard Dabate was sentenced to 65 years in prison. The judge called his actions brutal, calculated, incomprehensible. His maximum release date is May 2087. He will die in prison. Before being led away, he said, "I am here before you as an innocent man. I will never stop fighting for justice for my wife Connie, who I think about every single day." But his words rang empty, like all the ones that came before. The same man who set the stage, who rehearsed the role, who tried to rewrite the ending, now silenced by truth. But not everyone found peace. Connie's father died in 2019, holding on as long as he could to see justice done. His body gave out before the verdict could bring peace. Her mother lives in constant grief, remembering Connie's last words on the phone. "Mom, I love you. You're my best friend." Those words now echo in a house where her voice no longer lives. Her sons, RJ and Connor, were left behind, raised by Connie's sister, living with the reality that the man who was supposed to protect them destroyed their world. And still, they ask, is the bad man coming back? Because Richard's lies weren't just about an affair or an alibi. They were about stealing childhood, stealing security, stealing a mother's arms from her children. We cover many cases, stories where jealousy, greed, or desperation push someone to the edge. But this one aches differently because Connie wasn't in the way. She was the life Richard promised to love, and he threw her away like a problem to be solved. Not for survival, but for convenience. There's a lesson here, one that hurts to say aloud. Sometimes the person who says, "I love you" the loudest is the one already planning your ending. If you found this story moving or heartbreaking, let us know in the comments. And if you want to hear more stories like this, stories that deserve to be remembered, please consider subscribing. For Connie, for every voice that was taken too soon.